The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first short presentation of two presentations. I'm going to cover critical skills first, and then we're going to move on to evidence-based practice. Let's just have a quick look. We're up to, lots of people still joining, so we'll just give it a couple of minutes just to allow people to finish logging on. That's just if I open my questions panel, can a few people indicate that that you can hear me? Yeah, good out. Great. Okay, most people are absolutely fine with that. As I say, still quite a lot of people arriving, so we'll just give a couple of minutes to let people get sorted. Slow down now. We are going to have the evidence-based practice lecture. I'm just going to give a short presentation on critical skills first because I moved it from yesterday. Okay, we're up to a fair number now, so I think we'll start. Okay, so just for those last few that are joining now, we're going to have a short critical skills presentation, which I moved from yesterday, and then we'll do evidence-based practice. The two things go together quite well, actually, so it's not a bad thing that we're doing it now. Can I just ask you, can one or two people come back and say what their understanding is of what critical skills are, just to start off with, see where we are with that? People to come back, evaluating, that's certainly a component of it. Self-reflection, well, yes, possibly. Being analytical, yes, definitely. Thinking in a critical way, yep, that's a good way of summarising it. Critically evaluating, making decisions, making informed decisions. Analysis is coming up a lot. Weighing the pros and cons, another way of looking at it, in order to make sound judgments based on information. Keeping an open mind, looking for evidence, based on observation, yes, in part, but we'll talk a bit more about that as we go along. And making decisions based on valid premises. That's quite a good one, Isaiah. Okay, so we'll let's have a look at some of these slides. Those are all good good answers to the question, really, and you've covered quite a bit of it there already. So we'll move along and have a look at some of these. So lots of these already come up, but what we could list critical skills as being analysing, separating, or breaking down a whole into parts to discover their nature, functionality, and relationships. So it's being able to break something down into its constituent parts and understand how they fit together, and also how they link to other sort of phenomena or concepts. It makes anything easier to understand if you break it down into its smaller parts. Applying standards, we do that a lot in nursing. Judging something against a set of preset standards or rules or criteria. I mean, that's used a lot in nursing, where we're making observations, but we want to structure those observations and use a standardized format to gain information or to record information. Discriminating, recognizing the differences and similarities amongst and between things or situations, and being able to sort of categorize things, use typologies. Someone's saying they can't hear me. Let me just check my audio. My audio level's still okay from this end. And most people are saying that they're okay with that. Information seeking, searching for evidence, facts, knowledge, identifying relevant sources, and gathering objective, subjective, historical and current data from those sources. That's what this is where critical thinking sort of crosses over into your study skills: how to use the library, how to use the electronic library, how to use the databases there to find evidence in order to allow you to make judgments or engage in analysis. Logical reasoning, being able to draw inferences and make conclusions from the evidence that you find. Predicting, being able to envision a plan and its consequences, again based on evidence. And linking and transferring knowledge. I'm yet again being asked to slow down, so I'll do my best. I know I have a tendency to go a bit too quickly when I'm doing these things. I'll just have a little, the people that were struggling with audio seem to be okay now. I'll just have a look at a few more questions, which mostly seem to be about technical difficulties. Let's have a look. Okay, let's move on a little bit. So how do we learn? You're all engaged in higher education. Let's have a look at the different ways of viewing education. Dualism is a word that's used to describe a view of the world that's what we could call dichotomous. You could characterize that as being black and white, right and wrong, good and bad. Okay, so that view of in that view of education, the gaining of knowledge is a linear relationship in which quantitative facts are passed on by authoritative experts. The lecturer, i.e. me, oops, sorry, I've gone on too quickly, knows the right answer and is going to tell you what it is. And a right answer exists for everything. What do you think about that? Is that a useful view of education? People are coming back saying it might have some place, but there are grey areas, and there's a danger that these might be ignored. Also that this is an outdated view and not practical, and that the people's view about what's right and wrong might vary. There's an interesting view coming across that this way of teaching might work well in certain areas, like if you're teaching numeracy, maths and so on, that it might work well because there's less ambiguity involved in that area. Other people are coming back saying that a range of different opinions could be valid. We're going to sort of challenge that really about opinion and validity a bit later on. But yes, it's true to say that even lecturers have their own personal opinions, and these can affect or bias the way they present information. And I would agree that not all opinions are valid. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. This is another view of education then, in which we will be honouring diverse views when the right answer is unknown, when there is no definitive right answer. And in this multiplicity kind of view of education, all opinions are equally valid. And peers are also a source of knowledge, and everyone is entitled to their own opinion. What about that one then? What do we think about that? A few people supporting that. Any problems with it, do you think? People are indicating there's no structure, that some opinion and information might be unreliable. How can we be sure that how reliable information is? Okay. Someone's pointed out that some people are more forceful about stating their opinions, and that might mean that their opinions gain more value. Someone's mentioned that we need to look at the evidence that back up opinions. Someone's indicating that sharing opinions gets a dialogue going, and that's a good thing, and I would agree with that. People are starting to mention checking sources that back up opinions or that support opinions. And the word validity is coming up a lot. Right, let's move on to the last one of these then, relativism. As lots of people have said in their questions and the way they've come back to the last two slides, opinions definitely do vary in value. And there can be no doubt that some opinions have very little value. Opinions need to be supported with evidence. But also we need to have a dialogue that's reasonable, in which people can disagree and discuss and make argument. And that's a key thing, really. It's the weight of argument that adds value to an opinion. And we'll have a look at that in a moment. So we need to view knowledge as both, in terms of both its quality and its context, the way in which it's going to be applied, and the way in which it's delivered. It's true that people's experience does come into play as well, and that is a form of evidence, but it's not a particularly strong form of evidence. So we could characterize learning as being an enduring change in behaviour, and hopefully one that has good outcomes. Another definition could be the process by which an organism changes its behaviour as a result of experience, a process whereby knowledge is created through the transformation of experience. Here's another one, an enduring change in behaviour, or the capacity to behave in a given fashion which results from practice or other forms of experience. I'll just go back actually to that last slide. I mean, that's what university is all about, really, isn't it? And what nurse training is supposed to be for. If we couldn't, if people weren't capable of changing, then there would be little point, wouldn't there? People change a lot over the 3 years of a nursing programme, and I've seen it happen many times. I've got quite a good perspective on that. So I think that's something that we can all look forward to over the next 3 years. The sources, hopefully, I'm pretty sure, are all listed in the reference slides at the back. Whether or not they're American, I'm not sure. I can't remember which country Shul comes from. But it's worth saying that the philosophy of education is fairly international in its nature. So what is critical thinking? The formation of logical inference, deciding, and then you could describe that as deciding what action to take or what to believe through reasonable and reflective thinking. And the kind of questions that we might pose to ourselves when we're engaging in a sort of logical process of deciding on the value of information and the way in which we're going to use information. There are three sorts of questions that could be useful in this. And they're questions with one right answer. And as people have pointed out, in some fields those do exist. Questions with no right answer. And in nursing, we're going to come across quite a few of those. But most importantly, questions with better and worse answers. And often that's the process that we're engaged in. Trying to come up with the best answer that we possibly can through the use of the best evidence that we can possibly access. And we can do this through a process of educational change, really, that we're all engaged in now over the next 3 years, and indeed through the rest of your life and your career. You should be engaging with the information that's available to you at university, and look for opportunities to use the process of reasoning, and don't be afraid to do this. I think you need to have confidence in your own reasoning ability. It's not until you engage in this process that you start to get better at it, really, which is what university is all about. I know a lot of you are feeling anxious about this at the moment, but I would urge you to do your best to really get to grips with the information, start trying to decide on its value and how you can use it to support an argument. Other useful things are intellectual curiosity and the desire to know the truth, to find out, and cognitive maturity, which is something that we're all developing. I'm 53 now, and I think I'm still definitely developing this, which is an openness to other points of view, an awareness of biases and predispositions, and our own sort of personal biases, which can affect the logical use of information and the logical process of decision making. That's a dynamic process. We have to constantly monitor ourselves and the information that we're looking at for bias. So we'll ask the question, why reason and why argue? And people are pointing out that reason and debate is the process that we're engaged in on a degree. It's the absolute centre of what we're going to be about for the next 3 years, and that it's not just over the next 3 years, but it's something that we need to engage in for the rest of our lives. And the idea that we need to experience different ideas and thinking on any subject So reasoned argument then is a huge component of critical thinking. Developing the ability to appraise whether a statement should be accepted as it's stated, and the reasons that are there to support it, and the evidence that's there to support it. So let's look at some examples. Okay, here's a statement that you can evaluate using your reasoning. You ought to work very hard in NRS 102 because, what do you think? Because it's really interesting? Well, some people are already coming back saying if you don't, you'll fail, and I want to pass, and it'll pay off when you get your marks. To prove yourself, to gain confidence. I mean, these are all excellent answers. It gives you good grounds for further study. Hard work is rewarded. It's the beginning of your career, and it provides a good foundation for the rest of the course. There won't be direct questions on critical thinking in the exam, but clearly you're going to have to use it in order to pass the exam. To get the best learning experience, I think those are all good answers. And I think you've already covered the importance of understanding its content. And people are making links to practice, which I think is crucial, really. That we're not just learning to do this as an academic exercise. You're going to be applying this to the decisions that you make whilst you're in practice and actually working with people who are depending on you. And this one's come up quite a lot, because of course there is something to be said for keeping your eye on the prize, isn't there? You all want a career as nurses. You wouldn't be here otherwise. So 3 reasons why I think why it is important to think critically. Because all the decisions we have to make in our everyday lives, and some examples of these might be, which university should I go to? Hopefully you all think that you made the right decision there. What career should I pursue? Similarly, should I go to a party this evening or do some work? Which political party should I vote for? Should I vote at all? But the main reason for learning to reason and to argue is because it's a really useful and transferable skill. Many people use it in their working lives. Well, I think we all do. Journalists, politicians, lawyers, doctors, and nurses are in a dynamic decision-making environment that goes on at all different levels constantly in your working lives. The decisions that you make impact on people's lives, from the seemingly low level, like where you place a glass of water for somebody who's bedbound, to the very highest, whether or not somebody should be restrained in a crisis situation, for instance. And also, as nurses, you'll constantly be working with others and working as part of a team. And that means that you'll have to communicate at a high level with other people. And this little statement sort of characterises that. I'll work with you better if I can understand your reasons for thinking and doing the things that you do. So your ability to explain yourself and explain why you want to take a particular course of action to others is really important. But you also need to understand other people's point of view, even if you think they're wrong. And if we don't get along, and you will find yourself working with people that initially you don't get on with. The ability to think critically may become even more important because it's a means to resolve conflict. And this is vital when working as a member of a team or managing the work of others. And one thing to keep in mind is that qualified nurses are managers from the very beginning of their career. You will be managing the work of other people. Some key concepts then are that an argument is a statement along with some reasons for accepting the statement. There are three components of an argument: a claim, i.e. this is true; a reason, this is true because; and the support for that reason, the evidence that offers challenges and supports the reasons given. And evidence comes in various forms, and we'll just be discussing this shortly in the evidence-based practice lecture. Just a little bit of advice then before we get on to evidence-based practice on how to link in your writing a claim to the reasons for making it. Good words to use are things like so, hence, thus, therefore, it follows that. Sorry, I'll just go back to that slide. I need to go on that quickly. And once you've established the link between the claim, the statement, and the reasons for making it, then you need to link that to sources of evidence. And some useful terms for doing that are: a range of authors have, and a range of authors have carried out research that supports this argument. There is a considerable body of evidence to support, or Smith and Jones in their review of, and so on. I hope that's helpful. It's the best I could come up with really for how to actually get this into your writing. You don't have to use these. Here's an example of a statement that it doesn't actually include any of them, and people's styles of writing differ. Well, actually, apart from the last little bit there, that is similar to linking the examples I gave of linking evidence. Somebody wants me to go back to the previous slide with the examples. That one? Okay, we need to move on because we need to get on to the main part of the lecture. Critical thinking also means that you must evaluate information, because some arguments are more valuable than others. Some types of evidence are more valuable than others. Assessing claims, assessing arguments, and assigning value. Your personal opinion has very little value if it's unsupported when making an academic argument. You will need to engage with published material to assess what claims are being made. You also need to assess the reasons for making the claims. And finally, you need to assess the quality of the evidence that's linked to the reasons. And in all your writing, you must get used to this. If you make a claim in your essay, you must discuss the reasons for making the claim and then link it to some evidence from published literature. And the quality of evidence is really important as well. So it's also important that the way that you engage with this process is clear, accurate, precise, relevant, has depth and breadth, and is logical. Does it make sense? These are really good key standards to keep in mind when you're writing for assignments. Okay, so that's the end of those slides. A few references there. If any of them are missing from the text, can people let me know, and I'll do my best to add them. Right, we're going to move on now to the evidence-based practice presentation. This one's a little bit unusual because I'm going to interact with a recorded presentation that was done by a colleague of mine who works a lot in this area, Graham Williamson. Also, Dan Metcalf, our technician, is with me at the moment, and he's going to help me to interact with the presentation because it's a bit.
Welcome to GoToWebinar, Webinars Made Easy.
That's
Welcome
it.
to GoToWebinar,
Right.
Webinars Made Easy.
Sorry about that, everybody. That's not going to work, I'm afraid. We tried our best and failed. What we will do is I will do the presentation, it almost seemed like it was working for a moment then, but I don't think I don't think it is going to. Can we turn the audio down on this so that it doesn't sort of. Oh yeah. Right. Just get rid of that. That's done. Okay. So we're going to have a look at evidence-based practice. I'm going to make the presentation. I've listened to Graham's presentation, so I'm sure I'll make a decent attempt at it, and it'll just make life a lot easier than you sitting in silence while Dan and I fiddle around with microphones and try and get the pre-recorded one to work. So apologies about that. And here we go then, evidence-based practice. Okay, so unsurprisingly, this is the use of evidence to inform practice, and it's crucial to the way that practice in nursing and midwifery and health visiting has developed, obviously, as well as medicine and all health professions. Because without evidence, we can't change or adapt our practice. We just end up doing the same thing in the same way, which may or not be the best way. Now, I can remember a really good example of this from my own early beginnings in nursing. People working on elderly mental illness wards would commonly wash patients with a very thick solution of soapy water and leave the soap to dry on people's skin, because there was a myth, essentially, that this was good for people's skin. In fact, subsequent research showed, and actually in some senses common sense shows, that this wasn't a good thing to do for people's skin. In fact, it dries your skin out and damages it. When I was very first working as a student nurse, there was a big push on to stop non-qualified staff from doing this. I'm just trying to get the questions back. There we go. And some people are coming back and saying they remember that happening as well. So I hope that wasn't recent, Tracy. Okay, so evidence-based practice is a key strategy within the development of NSFs. Those are National Service Frameworks, which are major policy documents that are used to design the way in which the NHS develops in the future. And patient information that's passed on to patients to allow them to know what to expect from services. And also the assessment of evidence forms the basis of the development of clinical guidelines, which are produced by the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence. This is a very important body. They provide guidelines in many major areas of healthcare practice, and those are documents that you're going to, nice guidelines are documents that you're going to be coming across continually in your studies. Is anyone else having trouble still with audio? No? I think for most people it seems okay, so hopefully the people that are struggling with it, it'll sort itself out. So everyone in healthcare has to make decisions. You're making them constantly in your work, as we've already talked about when we were talking about critical skills. And the decisions you make in your care of an individual patient are no less important than those made by policymakers and managers. Each activity or treatment means that we have alternatives. There are different ways we can go. And as I was saying in our clinical skills presentation, patients and clients value your expertise, and they assume that you've got expertise, and we have a duty to the people that we care for to be well informed and to stay well informed throughout our career. You will build up experience as you go. However, it's too easy to rely on custom and practice. My soap example is a good idea. Is a good example. That practice had been in place for many, many years. Some people are even coming back saying that they've still seen it happening in nursing homes. these sorts of things, custom and practice, can become incredibly ingrained and very hard to get rid of. What you'll see when you start in practice are the clear influences that evidence-based practice have, and when we engage in this process wholeheartedly, it acts as a real engine for research. And the product of research is an increased availability of information. We're exposed more and more to the mass media and to the internet. People are better and better informed. Now, this is a good thing. It keeps the pressure on services to be up to date, to be effective, because it allows people to make far more informed choices about their own care than they ever could have done in the past. But we also live in a world in which there are cash limits on what the NHS can do, and decisions must be made about the most effective way to spend money. That's a big part of NICE's role, really, is deciding on where the money is going to be spent. And you'll probably, I'm sure you've all seen the debates that come in the media usually about spending money on cancer drugs and on people complaining that they can't access a drug that might extend their life or give them a better quality of life. Sorry, somebody's coming back and saying they've already figured out for themselves that EBP stands for evidence-based practice. Someone else is coming back, mentioning, Amanda's mentioned postcode lotteries. I mean, that in a sense is a lack of evidence-based practice, because these decisions should be made without bias, and geographical differences in the availability of healthcare that is bias. Evidence-based practice then is an attempt to move away from past ineffective practice and towards a more scientific way of working. A scientific way of working that's based on research and evidence derived from systematic scientific approaches coupled with our expertise and experience. So you don't throw your expertise and experience out the window. We've still got to make sound informed decisions for individuals, and one size sort of fits all services can be just as dangerous as ones that are based on anecdote. Now people are asking how do we evaluate research? How do we know what is effective and what isn't? And we're going to look at that in a bit more detail now, actually. So we're going to be looking at evidence to support claims or statements and the reasons behind them. And we're also going to have to evaluate that evidence. There's an awful lot of scientific research published, and some of it is much better than others. So how do we decide which research we should value and use to support our academic writing and our practice, and which is less credible? Well, there's a hierarchy of evidence that's used to help you do this, and at the very top of that are published documents that are known as systematic reviews or meta-analyses. Now, this is a piece of research, and what this research does is it tries to pull together other scientific studies and compare their results in order, if you like, to put all this data together as one big study. Now, if scientific experiments are sufficiently similar, you can do that. You can put their data together and you can analyze them as one body of data. And obviously this is quite a powerful thing to do, because it gives you what is in effect a massive sample. So it's taking an overview, if you like, of all the past research and seeing where that leaves us in terms of how effective a treatment, say a drug treatment, or it could be a type of dressing, or it could be a type of talking therapy for depression and anxiety. This gives us an overview of all the research that's been done and an overview of the efficacy of the treatments that have been the subject of that research. So that's the very top of the evidence tree, if you like. Now, one down from that are randomized controlled trials. These are individual experiments that are carried out to determine the effectiveness of some form of treatment. So systematic reviews pull all the RCTs together to give you an overview of them. But individual RCTs can be very powerful. If they're well conducted, with all appropriate measures taken to remove bias from them, then as standalone pieces of research, they're very powerful. They're just not as powerful or as valuable as systematic reviews. Okay, so that's RCT stands for randomized controlled trial. Next step down on the evidence hierarchy from that are other methodologies. Now, quite often, for all sorts of reasons, it's not possible to carry out a randomized controlled trial. Most often that's because it would be unethical to do so. Generally speaking, and this is a huge oversimplification, in a randomized controlled trial, that's say of a drug treatment, you split your sample into two groups, you randomly allocate people to those groups. One group receives the treatment and the other group receives some form of placebo, which is something that looks exactly the same as the treatment but doesn't have the active ingredient. And you make a comparison between what happens to those two groups. Now, one group is clearly being deprived of the treatment, and in some circumstances that's not ethical. I can't go into the detail of that, we haven't got time today, but so when we're in those situations where it's impossible to carry out an RCT, other methodologies come into play, like large-scale surveys, which is where you just take a very large group of people and you gather information from them. The national census is a good example of that. So the national census might, for instance, record basic information about all of us, how many men, women, children and so on live in a certain area. The next level underneath that are small-scale studies and qualitative research. Now, qualitative research is very important. Again, a huge oversimplification, but basically this is research where we ask people what they think. We actually ask them for their opinions, their feelings, and their experiences. A randomized controlled trial or other methodologies can tell you whether or not something has happened, but they can't tell you why, in terms of human experience, that phenomenon happened. And that's where qualitative research comes in, because we're asking people about their experiences and getting really rich, detailed information from them. People are mentioning things like in RCTs, sort of ethical difficulties around things like informed consent and so on, and that's true. These are problems that these sort of scientific approaches can pose. Someone's used the word quantitative. I mean, that's quite right. Randomized controlled trials and surveys, for that matter, are often termed quantitative research because they're concerned with counting, really. Yeah, they're concerned with quantities, and that's why that word is used. as opposed to qualitative. So an RCT, again, very simply put, is counting how many people had a beneficial effect from a drug, and a qualitative piece of research doesn't count. It asks people what their experience may be of taking that drug was. And the lowest level of in this hierarchy of evidence is expert opinion. Now this is still a form of evidence, and a lot of expert opinion is published. The fact that it's published increases its value as long as it's published in what's called a peer-reviewed journal, which means other people have had a look at it and evaluated its value. So this is an important form of evidence, but it is the lowest level. I think you're unlikely to actually experience an RCT going on in your place of work. It could possibly happen. So this is a description of evidence-based practice as the conscientious, explicit and judicious use of current best evidence in making decisions about the care of individual patients. So it's this process of gathering evidence, evaluating evidence, and that filtering down into the way that we treat patients. It means integrating individual clinical expertise with the best available clinical evidence from systematic research. Clinical excellence is about ensuring that interventions are based on the best available evidence, but effectiveness about applying such interventions in real life situations is not as simple as you might think. Research, and particularly randomized controlled trials, have quite often been conducted in ideal conditions, which then go on to demonstrate efficacy. And this may be very far from the real world, and thus may not be effective in practice. Now, I can give you an example of this. A randomized controlled trial was carried out on the effectiveness of cognitive behavior therapy. The way the experiment was set up was that one group of patients were randomly allocated to cognitive behavior therapy with a highly trained nurse therapist, cognitive behavior therapist. Now these nurse therapists had been pre-checked, if you like, to make sure that they adhered very closely to this form of talking therapy for depression, cognitive behavior therapy. And they were going to deliver that to this randomly selected group of patients. So they were highly trained. They'd been checked to make sure that they adhered to this particular form of talking therapy for depression. Now the placebo group, or what's often called the controlled group, they were randomly allocated to receive supportive chat, supportive conversation, again from a nurse, but not somebody that had been trained in the use of talking therapy. So they were going to have a supportive chat with a nurse. Now, the result of that study showed that all these people in both groups were suffering from depression, and the depressed people that received care from the trained nurses in cognitive behavior therapy got better more quickly, and they had a more sustained recovery than the depressed people that just had a supportive chat. I don't know how well I've explained that. I'm sure you'll let me know. But the problem with that is that in the real world, when this is applied in the real world, often people's training in cognitive behavior therapy that is very variable. And so the application of the results of this study to real-world situations is extremely difficult unless you're really sure of the training that people are receiving. Even if they're qualified as cognitive behaviour therapists, they have to be engaged in an ongoing process of training and of supervision, and those things are quite hard to control. So the results from the RCT may not transfer into real life practice unless those things are in place, unless there's sufficient training, sufficient supervision for the workers, so that you can be really sure that they are actually delivering cognitive behaviour therapy. So clinical effectiveness is not the same thing as the result of an RCT. The next stage really is embedding the results from research into organisations and systems in a way that works. And clinical effectiveness is part of what's known as clinical governance and the overall strategy of the NHS. So every time a piece of research is carried out and it shows efficacy, it has to be evaluated for clinical effectiveness. How well can this thing actually be translated into real life situations and real life practice? Now here's another example. Tonsillectomy. It's a procedure commonly carried out on children and adults. The estimated cost to the NHS of people going to their GPs with sore throats is £60 million, or it was in 2011. And a senior ear, nose and throat consultant says that not enough tonsillectomies are done, so that's take out more tonsils, and then people won't go to their GP with a sore throat. What do you think about that? Anybody got an opinion? Seems to make sense, doesn't it? It saves some money on people going to see their GPs with a sore throat. So if we take everyone's tonsils out, they won't. What do we think? Now, some people are actually struggling with tonsillitis, but I think you're biased, frankly. Now, some people are saying that we have to take into account the costs and effects of surgery. It might be, to coin a phrase, using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. That tonsils may actually have some value. That maybe it should only happen if the tonsillitis is recurring, and I think that's a very good point, Esther. That's on the money, really, that one. That there are risks associated with surgery. That's Anna Marie. I think that's right. And someone's actually sharing a personal experience of having bad side effects from this type of surgery. So let's have a look at the next slide. Okay, according to a systematic review, which we've already said is the highest form of evidence, some children get better without surgery. Removing tonsils will always prevent tonsillitis, but the impact on the procedure on sore throats is actually much less predictable, because people go to their GPs with a sore throat for all sorts of reasons. So when we actually refer to the highest form of evidence, the one we must sort of give the most credence, it tends to sort of indicate that maybe tonsillectomies aren't such a good thing after all. Now, children who, what the systematic review did show was that children who are severely affected by recurrent tonsillitis, and somebody actually said this, may benefit, but you've got to weigh these in the light of the risks of surgery and the possibility that they may grow out of the problem. So if they're less severely affected, then the potential benefits are very modest indeed. So the evidence does not support tonsillectomy unless sore throats are severe. So the sources of evidence that you're going to be looking at, well, there's what's called primary research, which is an account of an actual research project written up by the people that carried it out, which then goes on to be published in a peer-reviewed journal. That's a journal that monitors its own input for quality. It will set up a panel of reviewers to look through research, and they're all experts in their field, so they're in a good position to judge its value. And it only gets published after they've given it the okay. So that's primary research. But there are now many sources of guidelines which pull research together, and some of these have more value than others. Top of the tree really are NICE guidelines, because these are national guidelines and care pathways that set quality standards, which really should form the basis of all our care. And it also governs the way that the government spends its money. They put more money into things which are supported by NICE guidelines. Now, another very high form of evidence, high source of evidence, is highly valued. Cochrane reviews. We'll have a look at the Cochrane review website in a moment, but really, whenever you are writing about any engaged in academic writing that's going to look at the effectiveness of a treatment, you really ought to search for NICE guidelines and for Cochrane reviews first and foremost. Other really reliable sources of evidence are the Joanna Briggs website and the SIGN organisation website. These are organisations that both produce systematic reviews of research and that would indicate, like Cochrane reviews and NICE guidelines, the current best practice. And they do their absolute best to stay up to date, because evidence bases are always evolving. There's research being carried out all over the world all of the time. But before we go on to look in more detail at sources of evidence, do you think that we should test everything related to health with a randomized controlled trial? What do you think? I mean, I've said that because there's a huge increase in testing things using RCT. Does that mean that we kind of suspend our common sense? What do you think? Some people are saying it's not practical in all situations, and coming back and saying no, we possibly shouldn't. So other people are saying, well, really, if it were possible, then we should try and look at as many things as we possibly can, but there are financial limitations. Let me just move on to this next slide. What about that then? How about that for is that a good, worthwhile RCT to carry out? That's a possible title. It's quite serious, isn't it? It involves death and major trauma. Maybe it's something that should be studied. Have a think about that title. Sorry, I should have said this is a title for a systematic review. What I should say is, how likely is it that there'll be RCTs to review, and how valuable would it be as a systematic review? Okay, so yeah, there are unlikely to be RCTs of parachute use to prevent death, because the end result for the control group would be unethical. Okay, all right, but could this be justified in any way? Well, let's have a think about that, shall we? So the justification put forward by the authors could be that actually this does need reviewing, because observation alone is not enough. And this is based on the true statement that not everybody who jumps out of a plane without a parachute dies. Some people survive. And furthermore, there's good evidence to indicate that some people have actually been killed by parachutes even though they opened. So we can't rely on observation alone. We really ought to test this. What do you think? Someone's pointing out that the laws of physics do tend to indicate that you're far more likely to die jumping out of an aeroplane without a parachute than if you had one. Okay, let's go on to a. Actually, I will just go back to that side and point out that I am joking. Not only is this a complete waste of time, but you couldn't possibly carry out an RCT of people jumping out of planes with and without parachutes. And the fact that a minute number of people survive in this type of situation is irrelevant, because common sense tells us, and as someone's pointed out already, physics tells us that overwhelmingly, if you jump out of an aeroplane without a parachute, you die. Now, there might be some value in researching why the people that have been killed by parachutes were killed, but as someone else has pointed out, you'd have to find some other way of doing it that didn't result in your control group dying. Okay, here's a more sensible example. Some years ago, it was thought that hormone replacement therapy protected women from heart disease. Now, this was mostly based on observation at the time. It hadn't been studied. Has anyone come across that information or seen anything about it in the media? Let's have a look and see what people say. Oh, I keep jumping back up to the top. There we go. No one's come back yet. Do you know that HRT is hormone replacement therapy? It's given in menopause to prevent the impact of menopause to women. Okay. Now that had been that was an emerging view really, and then a series of randomized controlled trials were carried out in America under the umbrella of a thing called the Women's Health Initiative, and this seemed to indicate that actually HRT, hormone replacement therapy, raises the risk of coronary heart disease and also many other risks, and this caused quite furore at the time. Lots of stuff in the media about it. I think this was in the mid to early 2000s. So that was the result of an RCT that challenged this sort of prevailing view. However, more recently, 2012, a paper published. It's first worth saying that the authors of that Women's Health Initiative study later concluded that actually the risk of coronary heart disease were not that significant. And a later study published in the British Medical Journal last year, which was a really well set up and rigorous study, indicated that after 10 years of randomized treatment, women receiving hormone replacement therapy early after menopause had a significantly reduced risk of heart failure or heart attack, and with no increased risk of cancer, thrombosis or stroke. Now you can see here, can't you, the way that the evidence base is progressing as more and more research becomes available. Okay, we've nearly finished. We'll just have a look here. This is the NICE website. I suggest you have a look at this. That's the SIGN website. The links are embedded within the presentation. This is the Cochrane website. So I think we can say then that evidence-based practice is an important global movement in healthcare decision making. The Nursing and Midwifery Council have recommended that there's a big teaching component about evidence-based practice in pre-reg programs, and you've got a whole module about it coming up. In fact, there's two, because there's another one in the second. There's one in the second year and one in the third year. These are some of the references, the key references that I used in the presentation. That's the hormone replacement one. If you want to go and find it, the parachute meta-analysis is published in the BMJ, but it's a joke. It's quite funny. Go and read it. It has something to say about evidence-based practice in quite an amusing way. So I haven't put the reference here, but you can go and find it for yourselves. So those are a few useful references. I'll stay on the line for a few more minutes just to have a look at people's questions. Can I say, before people leave, I've set a poll up for this study, and I'm just going to ask Ed how I manage that.
If you choose which one you want to use from the drop down.
All of them.
So if you click launch on the first one.
This one, have I got to click the box?
No, it's
just launch.
Yeah. That's right.
Yep, great. Can you answer these questions on the poll that's coming up now? Because we want to know how well these things are working for you. I'm just going to have to consult Dan again. Does that mean all the ones that I set up are working? It does, doesn't it?
It's only one at a time now.
So when...
that's 15
Okay, when this one's finished, I'm going to set you another one. Can as many of you as possible hang on then, because there's another poll coming up in a second, which is about technical difficulties you might have had with the presentations. So I'd be really interested to get people's opinion on that as well. So we'll just wait while this one's building. People are being very good actually in letting me know their views. 68, 70, 80, no.
You can share the results with the viewers.
Yeah, I will do. And let's just. So, does it give an? Oh, it's given 74%.
So if you if you're happy with that.
Anyone else still connected that wants to vote? Because I'm going to close the poll in a second. Should I click? Yeah. Okay, so we're going to close that one.
If you want to share the results now, you can.
Yeah, I will do.
If you just click that,
Okay, so that's the result of the poll. So we've got, in terms of, I think this is quite appropriate actually, given the presentation I've just given. This seems to indicate that 89% of you were either mostly positive or neither positive nor negative, or were sort of neutral about the use of webinars. How do I set the next one?
So if you click hide,
Okay.
just to the left, you've got a drop down of where it says shared.
Yeah.
If you click on that one, you can choose the next one.
That one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Click launch.
Here's another one then. Those of you, hopefully, most people are still having a look at these for me. Could you let me know if you've, and I should have said there's one more after this, so just bear with me and we'll get some really useful information about how effective this thing is. Okay, we're up to about the same percentages as last time, so I'm going to close this one and I will share the results with you. There we go. Evidence-based practice in action, everybody. And this is the final one then.
Just the drop down, yeah.
This one's quite important because it'd be really helpful if we, I think you working in groups looking at these webinars is a really good thing, so I'd like to know how many of you have shared screens to watch the presentations. Okay, so we're up to about the same percentages as on the last two, so I'm going to close the poll now, and I will share the results of that one as well. So about 20% of you have watched these together. Okay, that's great. Thank you ever so much for doing that, and thanks for attending the webinar. We're going to finish there. I have recorded this. I will upload it as soon as I possibly can, and I hope it was. Sorry for the technical difficulties. I hope it was an okay learning experience for all of you, in spite of them. So let's just see. Let's make sure. I'll share that one as well. There we go. So stop recording.